Blood money buys everything except a clean conscience and a quiet past. Gabriel thought he'd buried his history the day he signed the divorce papers. But walking into Chicago's most exclusive restaurant with his new heiress fiancée, he never expected his past to pour his wine 7 months pregnant. The ache in Flora's lower back had settled into a dull, rhythmic throb, keeping perfect time with the jazz piano drifting through the dining room of Lara. Tucked away on Chicago's affluent Rush Street, the restaurant was a fortress of velvet ropes, dim amber lighting, and reservations that required either a Michelin-starred palate or a small fortune to secure. For the patrons, it was heaven. For Flora, known to management and her coworkers only as Clara, it was a grueling 8-hour marathon of masking her exhaustion behind a crisp white apron and a polite smile. She paused in the service alley, pressing a cool, damp towel against the back of her neck. Beneath her tailored black vest, her 7-month pregnant belly felt unusually heavy tonight. The baby, a little girl, according to the secret ultrasound she'd paid for in cash at a free clinic, gave a sharp kick against her ribs. "I know, little one," Flora whispered, her hand instinctively dropping to cradle the curve of her stomach. "Just 2 more hours. Then we can go home and put our feet up." Home was a 4th-floor walk-up in Pilsen, a stark contrast to the sprawling, gated estate in Lake Forest she had fled exactly 8 months ago. 8 months since she was Flora Castiglione. 8 months since she realized that being married to the underboss of the Chicago outfit meant waking up every day wondering if the man sleeping beside her would come home in a tailored suit or a body bag. The final straw hadn't been the late-night phone calls, or the sudden, unexplained cash flows. It had been the drive-by shooting on Michigan Avenue, the shattered glass of their armored SUV, the ringing in her ears, and the cold, dead look in Gabriel's eyes as he pulled a Glock 19 from his holster and fired back. She had packed a single duffel bag that night, leaving her wedding ring on the marble kitchen island. She filed for a quiet, uncontested divorce through a proxy lawyer, forged new identification documents, and disappeared. Gabriel had signed the papers reluctantly, she assumed, but he had let her go. He hadn't come looking. What Gabriel didn't know, what he could never know, was that she had missed her period 2 weeks before she ran. "Clara! Stop daydreaming, we have a code red in the VIP alcove." The frantic hiss belonged to Baptiste, the hyper-strung maitre d'. His face was flushed, his usually immaculate hair slightly disheveled. Flora straightened up, tucking the damp towel away. "What happened? I thought Jessica was covering the alcove tonight." Jessica just dropped a tray of champagne flutes in the kitchen and is having a full-blown panic attack in the walk-in cooler. Baptiste groaned, rubbing his temples. "The guests just arrived. Table 44. It's the owner's most terrifying investor and his fiancée. I need someone who won't trip over their own feet or stare at the man's security detail. You're my calmest server. Go." "Me?" "Baptiste, look at me," Flora protested, gesturing to her prominent stomach. "I can barely navigate between the tight tables, let alone carry the heavy silver platters for table 44. The alcove is spacious, and you only need to handle the wine service and the appetizers for now. Please, Clara, I'll bump your tip share to 20% for the night. Just get the menus to them, and open the vintage." Survival was a mathematical equation these days, and 20% of a VIP tip could pay for her winter heating bill. Flora took a deep breath, smoothing down her apron. "Fine. What are they drinking?" He pre-ordered a 2009 Chateau Margaux. "It's already breathing on the service cart. Go." Flora pushed through the swinging mahogany doors, the muted clatter of the kitchen instantly replaced by the hushed, expensive murmur of the main dining room. She navigated the floor with practiced grace, steering the silver service cart toward the back of the restaurant. Table 44 was situated inside a semi-private, sound-dampened alcove shielded by heavy velvet curtains. 2 men in dark, ill-fitting suits stood near the entrance security. Real security, not the rent-a-cops the restaurant usually hired. Flora's stomach did a nervous flip. The baby kicked again, harder this time. She pushed the cart through the parted curtains. The alcove was bathed in the warm, flickering glow of a single candelabra. A woman sat with her back to the entrance, draped in a backless emerald silk dress, her blonde hair styled in flawless, expensive waves. She was laughing, a high, musical sound that bounced off the mahogany walls. "Honestly, the catering in Milan is just so much better," the woman was saying, casually adjusting a massive diamond ring on her left hand. My father insists we use his people for the reception, but I told him. Flora moved to the side of the table, her eyes dropping to the white tablecloth to avoid staring. Good evening. Welcome to Laura. I have your pre-ordered Chateau Margaux. The man sitting opposite the blonde woman shifted in his leather chair. The candlelight caught the sharp, aristocratic angle of his jaw, the faint, silver scar running just below his left ear, the broad, imposing shoulders encased in a custom charcoal Brioni suit that she had picked out for him 2 Christmases ago. Flora's voice died in her throat. The silver wine key in her hand suddenly felt like a lead weight. Gabriel Castiglione looked up from his menu. For a fraction of a second, the expression on his face was one of polite, icy indifference, the face of a ruthless syndicate boss waiting for his drink. Then, his dark, piercing eyes locked onto hers. The world stopped spinning. The jazz music faded into a dull, rushing roar in Flora's ears. Silence slammed into the alcove, heavy and suffocating. Gabriel didn't gasp. He didn't drop his menu. But Flora, who had spent 3 years studying every micro-expression of the most dangerous man in Chicago, saw the immediate, violent shock shatter his composure. His knuckles, resting on the white linen, turned bone-white. His breathing hitched, the fabric of his vest pulling taut against his chest. He stared at her face, his eyes frantically cataloging her features as if trying to prove she was a hallucination. The dark circles under her eyes, her hair pulled back in a severe bun, the cheap uniform. She wasn't a ghost. She was right here. Gabriel? Are you even listening to me? The blonde woman Chloe Vanderwall, the sole heir to the Vanderwall shipping empire, waved a manicured hand in front of Gabriel's face. She finally turned her gaze toward Flora, her perfectly arched eyebrows knitting together in irritation. Well? Chloe snapped, looking Flora up and down with barely concealed disdain. Are you going to pour the wine? Or are you just going to stand there breathing my air? Flora's hands were trembling violently. Every instinct screamed at her to drop the wine key and sprint out the back door, out into the freezing Chicago night. But Gabriel's security was right outside the curtain. If she bolted, she wouldn't make it past the alley. She forced her gaze away from Gabriel's burning stare and looked at the wine bottle. My apologies, ma'am, Flora said, her voice sounding raspy and foreign to her own ears. Right away. She reached for the bottle of Margaux. As she stepped closer to the table, stepping out from behind the service cart, the dim light fully illuminated her profile. Gabriel's eyes, which had been locked onto her face, slowly dragged downward. They bypassed the cheap fabric of her vest and slammed directly into the undeniable, prominent swell of her 7-month pregnant stomach. Flora saw the exact moment the math clicked in his head. Gabriel was a man who dealt in numbers, logistics, and timelines. He knew the exact date she had disappeared into the night. 8 months ago, the bump protruding against her apron was clearly in the 3rd trimester. The blood drained from Gabriel's face. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. He wasn't just looking at the wife who had abandoned him. He was looking at the mother of his unborn child. A child he had no idea existed. I prefer a heavy pour, Chloe instructed, completely oblivious to the silent, atomic explosion happening across the table. She lifted her glass. My father says the Castiglione-Vanderwall merger requires a toast. To the new family, Gabriel. Gabriel slowly turned his head to look at Chloe, though his eyes looked hollow, unseeing. To family, he murmured, his voice a low, gravelly baritone that sent a shiver straight down Flora's spine. Flora gripped the neck of the bottle. She hovered the spout over Chloe's glass, pouring the dark red liquid. Her hand shook so badly that a single drop of wine splashed onto the pristine white tablecloth, blooming like a drop of fresh blood. Careful! Chloe hissed, pulling her dress back. Do you have any idea how much this silk costs? Good Lord, they'll hire anyone these days. Gabriel, speak to the manager. It's fine, Chloe, Gabriel said. His voice was dangerously calm. He didn't look at his fiancée. His eyes slowly traveled back up to Flora, pinning her in place. Leave the bottle. Sir, restaurant policy dictates, Flora tried to say, desperate to retreat to the safety of the kitchen. I said, leave the bottle, Gabriel repeated, the words rolling out softly, laced with absolute, terrifying authority. Flora swallowed hard. She placed the bottle on the table. As she pulled her hand back, Gabriel reached out. His large, warm fingers clamped around her wrist like a vice. It wasn't tight enough to hurt, but the grip was unbreakable. Chloe was busy checking her reflection in her phone screen, completely missing the contact. Gabriel pulled Flora slightly closer, leaning over the table. The scent of his familiar cologne, sandalwood, and expensive tobacco invaded her senses, making her eyes sting with unshed tears. "You look tired, Clara," Gabriel whispered, reading her name tag with dripping irony. His eyes darted to her stomach and back up to her face. A muscle ticked furiously in his jaw. "You shouldn't be on your feet. Not in your condition." "Let go of me," Flora whispered back, her voice shaking. "We are going to have a conversation," Gabriel breathed, his thumb brushing against her racing pulse point. "Tonight, you aren't running again." "Gabriel?" Chloe looked up, suddenly noticing the proximity. "What is going on? Do you know this waitress?" Gabriel smoothly released Flora's wrist, sitting back in his chair and seamlessly adjusting his cuffs. His face immediately morphed back into the impenetrable mask of a mafia boss. "She just reminded me of someone I used to know," Gabriel lied smoothly, not taking his eyes off Flora. "Someone who died a long time ago." The threat hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Flora stumbled back a step, almost tripping over the wheel of the service cart. "Enjoy your wine," Flora choked out. She turned on her heel and practically fled through the velvet curtains. She ignored the confused looks of the security guards and practically sprinted across the dining room floor, pushing through the kitchen doors and bypassing Baptiste entirely. She didn't stop until she reached the employee locker room in the basement. Flora locked the door behind her, sinking down against the cold cinder-block wall. She pulled her knees up as best as she could around her stomach, burying her face in her hands as she gasped for air. He found her. He saw the baby. Upstairs, in the dim light of the alcove, Gabriel watched the curtain fall back into place. He picked up his glass of wine, taking a slow sip. The vintage tasted like ash in his mouth. "She was terribly clumsy," Chloe sighed, slicing into her complimentary amuse-bouche. "Honestly, Gabriel, after the wedding, I'm taking over the restaurant selections. You let your people pick the most dreadful places." Gabriel set his glass down. He reached into his jacket, pulling out a burner phone. He typed a single encrypted message to his second-in-command waiting in the SUV outside. "Lock down the back exits of the restaurant. No employees leave tonight. Find out where Clara lives." He slid the phone back into his pocket, offering his new fiancée a chilling, empty smile. "Excuse me for a moment, my love," Gabriel said softly, standing up from the table. "I need to go speak with the management. It seems there's been a grievous error in the service." The basement locker room felt like a concrete tomb. Flora's hands shook so violently she could barely manipulate the combination lock. When it finally clicked open, she didn't bother folding her uniform. She simply tore the crisp white apron from her waist and threw it onto the linoleum floor. She shoved her sensible, rubber-soled work shoes into her faded duffel bag and pulled on her heavy winter boots. Every movement felt sluggish, her pregnant body protesting the sudden spike of adrenaline. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. He found me. He saw her. The thought echoed endlessly in her mind. She grabbed her wool coat, wrapping it tightly around her swollen belly, as if the thick fabric could shield her unborn daughter from the syndicate boss, sitting exactly 2 floors above them. She had $400 in cash stashed in the lining of her bag. It was enough for a Greyhound bus ticket to anywhere that wasn't Chicago. She bypassed the main staff stairwell, opting for the narrow, rusted fire exit that emptied directly into the back service alley. She pushed the heavy steel door open, gasping as the brutal, freezing wind off Lake Michigan hit her face. The alley was dark, illuminated only by a single, flickering halogen bulb buzzing above the restaurant's industrial dumpsters. Flora took exactly 3 steps into the sleet before a shadow detached itself from the brick wall. "You always hated the cold, Flora." The voice was soft, but it cut through the howling wind like a serrated blade. Flora froze. Gabriel stood between her and the street. He had discarded his suit jacket. The tailored charcoal vest clung to his broad chest, and his crisp white shirt sleeves were rolled up to the elbows. exposing the intricate black ink of his outfit tattoos. He wasn't flanked by his usual security detail. He was entirely alone, the glowing cherry of a cigarette burning between his fingers. "How did you get down here so fast?" Flora whispered, instinctively taking a step backward. Her back hit the freezing steel of the fire door. "I own the building," Gabriel replied smoothly. He dropped the cigarette onto the wet asphalt, crushing it beneath the heel of his Oxford shoe. "I bought the property 6 months ago through a shell corporation. I knew you loved this neighborhood. It was only a matter of time before you surfaced." You knew I was here?" "I knew you were in Chicago. I didn't know you were waiting tables at my own restaurant." He took a slow, deliberate step toward her. The amber light from the halogen bulb caught the raw, unmasked torment in his dark eyes. "And I certainly didn't know about this." He stopped just 2 feet away, his gaze dropping to the prominent mound hidden beneath her heavy wool coat. The air between them crackled with an intense, suffocating tension. "It's none of your business," Flora said, her voice shaking despite her desperate attempt to sound brave. "She is none of your business, Gabriel. You signed the papers. You let me go. I let you go because I thought I had failed to protect you." Gabriel's voice suddenly cracked like a whip, echoing off the brick walls. The polished, icy Mafia boss was gone. In his place was a man unraveling. "After the shooting on Michigan Avenue, I saw the terror in your eyes. I thought the only way to keep you breathing was to let you disappear. But if you had told me you were carrying my child, what would you have done?" Flora fired back, tears finally spilling hot and fast down her frozen cheeks. "Locked me in a gilded cage in Lake Forest? Surrounded my nursery with armed guards? I left because I refused to let my daughter grow up learning how to check a car for explosives before going to preschool. I left because your world is covered in blood, Gabriel." Gabriel flinched, the words landing like physical blows. He reached out, his large hands hovering just inches from her shoulders, wanting to touch her, but not daring to cross the line. "You think I'm marrying the Vanderwall heiress because I moved on?" Gabriel asked, his voice dropping to a harsh, ragged whisper. Flora looked away, the image of Chloe's massive diamond ring flashing in her mind. "I don't care why you're marrying her. You should, because her father ordered the hit on us." The silence that followed was absolute, save for the whistling wind. Flora's head snapped up, her eyes wide with shock. "What?" "The drive-by on Michigan Avenue wasn't a random rival faction," Gabriel explained, his jaw clenched so tight it looked carved from granite. "It was Arthur Vanderwall. He wanted to destabilize the Chicago outfit by taking out my wife. When you left, it gave me the perfect cover. I let the world think you abandoned me, and I played the grieving, humiliated ex-husband. I approached Vanderwall for a truce, offering a merger through marriage." Flora stared at him, the horrifying brilliance of his strategy slowly dawning on her. "You're getting inside their family. I am going to gut their empire from the inside out," Gabriel promised, his eyes burning with a dark, lethal fire. "I am going to dismantle every piece of Arthur Vanderwall's life, strip him of his wealth, his power, and his men, and then I am going to bury him for daring to put a target on your back. Chloe is nothing but a pawn to get me into their heavily guarded estate next weekend for the wedding." He finally closed the distance, his hands gently framing her face, his thumbs wiped away her freezing tears. "I didn't stop loving you, Flora," he breathed, his forehead resting against hers. "Every breath I took for the last 8 months was dedicated to destroying the men who made you run from me. And now that I know she exists." He slowly moved one hand down, resting it reverently against her swollen stomach. The baby immediately kicked against his palm. Gabriel gasped softly, closing his eyes as a profound, shattering tenderness washed over his face. "I will burn the entire world to ash before I let anyone threaten either of you." Before Flora could process the massive revelation, the screech of heavy tires tore through the alleyway. Headlights, blinding and high-beamed, flooded the narrow space. A black, armored Lincoln Navigator had slammed into the alley entrance, blocking the only route to the street. Gabriel's demeanor instantly shifted from a heartbroken lover to the ruthless outfit underboss. He shoved Flora violently behind the rusted steel of the restaurant's industrial dumpster, his body acting as a human shield. In a blur of motion, he drew a suppressed Sig Sauer from his shoulder holster. "Gabriel, what is it?" Flora panicked, clutching her stomach. Vanderwaal's fixers, Gabriel hissed, his eyes locked on the SUV. They've been tailing me, looking for a moment of weakness before the wedding. Me slipping out the back of the restaurant alone was exactly what they wanted. The doors of the Navigator burst open. 3 men in tactical gear poured out, their weapons raised. "Castiglione!" one of the men shouted over the wind. "Arthur sends his regards. The merger is cancelled. Stay down, cover your ears, and do not make a sound," Gabriel commanded Flora, his voice leaving absolutely no room for argument. The first shot shattered the halogen bulb above them, plunging the alley into pitch blackness, save for the sweeping headlights of the SUV. Flora curled into a tight ball on the freezing, wet asphalt, her hands clamped over her ears as the deafening, terrifying sound of gunfire erupted. It wasn't like the movies. It was loud, chaotic, and viscerally terrifying. But Gabriel moved with terrifying precision. He didn't waste bullets in the dark. He waited for the flash of the enemy muzzles, returning fire with lethal accuracy. Thwip, thwip, thwip. The silenced rounds from Gabriel's weapon found their marks. 2 heavy thuds echoed over the wind as the first 2 fixers hit the ground. The third man panicked, blindly spraying bullets toward the dumpsters. Concrete shrapnel rained down on Flora's coat. She bit her lip until it bled to keep from screaming. Suddenly, a new sound pierced the chaos, the roar of a high-performance engine approaching from the opposite end of the alley. A sleek, bulletproof Mercedes G-Wagon smashed through a chain-link fence, its high beams catching the final Vanderwaal gunman perfectly. Before the gunman could turn his weapon, a man leaned out of the passenger window of the Mercedes and fired twice. The threat was neutralized. The G-Wagon skidded to a halt just feet from the dumpsters. The doors flew open, and Dominic, Gabriel's most trusted enforcer and childhood friend, stepped out. He looked at the bodies, then at Gabriel. "Boss, you all right?" Dominic asked, keeping his weapon trained on the street. "Your security detail upstairs just realized you vanished. The Vanderwaal girl is throwing a fit." "I'm fine," Gabriel grunted, sliding his weapon back into its holster. He immediately turned, dropping to his knees beside Flora. "Are you hit? Flora, look at me. Are you hurt?" Flora slowly uncurled, her entire body shaking uncontrollably. I'm okay. The baby. She's moving. We're okay." Gabriel let out a ragged breath of relief, pulling her up from the freezing ground and crushing her against his chest. For a fleeting second, he buried his face in her neck, inhaling the scent of her. Then, he pulled back, his expression hardened with resolve. "The timeline just moved up," Gabriel told Dominic. "Vanderwaal knows I was playing him. We strike tonight. Mobilize the crews." "Understood, boss," Dominic nodded. Gabriel turned back to Flora, gripping her shoulders firmly. "Dominic is taking you to my private airstrip. My jet is fueled and waiting. You'll fly to a secure compound I own in upstate New York. It's off the grid, staffed with my most loyal people and a full medical team." "Gabriel, no," Flora protested, grabbing his vest. "Come with us. Walk away from this. We can disappear together." "If I walk away now, Arthur Vanderwaal will spend the rest of his life hunting us. He will never stop looking for you, and he will never stop looking for our daughter," Gabriel said, his voice laced with absolute certainty. "I have to cut the head off the snake. It's the only way to guarantee your safety." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a heavy, platinum band. It was her wedding ring, the one she had left on the kitchen island 8 months ago. Gabriel gently took her trembling left hand and slid the ring back onto her finger. It fit perfectly. "You are my wife," Gabriel whispered fiercely, kissing her knuckles. "You are the mother of my child. I am going to finish this war tonight, and when the dust settles, I am coming home to you. Do you understand?" Flora looked into his dark eyes. Beneath the blood, the violence, and the Mafia titles, she saw the man who had stayed up all night holding her hair back when she had the flu. The man who was currently marching toward his own potential death just to ensure she could sleep peacefully. She nodded, tears blinding her vision. "Come back to us. Promise me." "I swear it on my soul," Gabriel vowed. He helped her into the heavily armored back seat of the G-Wagon, securing her seatbelt himself. He stepped back, slamming the heavy door shut. Dominic got into the driver's seat, revving the engine. As the Mercedes reversed out of the alley, tearing away into the chaotic Chicago night. Flora looked back through the tinted rear window. Gabriel was walking back toward the fire door of La Hora. He was adjusting his cuffs, stepping over the bodies of the fixers, seamlessly transitioning back into the untouchable, lethal apex predator of the city. He was going back upstairs to face Chloe. He was going back to start a war. Flora placed both hands over her stomach, feeling the platinum ring cold against her skin. She had spent 8 months running from the darkness, only to realize that the darkness was the very thing keeping her in the light. The neon lights of Chicago faded in the rearview mirror as Dominic drove Flora into the night. She rested a hand on her stomach, feeling the strong, steady kicks of the daughter who inadvertently saved them both. Gabriel cast himself into the darkness to secure their bright light. The bloody past was not buried, but for the first time in 8 months, Flora knew their future was now absolutely safe.